Welcome to part 23 of my basic series in the Blender game engine. In this tutorial, we'll be talking about a few things. We'll be talking about image textures, how to bring images into Blender in the Blender game engine and apply those images to objects in your game. We'll also be talking about transparency, or in specific materials that have a transparent property to them. And thirdly, we'll be talking about how to add images onto objects that have a transparent part of the image. These are images that you might find on the internet that are called PNG images. PNG images, just like JPEG images, are a very common file format of images that are used on the internet, but PNG images in specific have the ability to have transparent sections in the image. In fact, I'll be giving you a few images to work with and follow along with me in this video. You'll find links to both of these images, an image texture of bricks and an image of leaves on a branch. You'll find links to both of those in the description area below this video on YouTube. Specifically because this image of leaves on a branch is a PNG image, it has this checkerboard area, and that's how most image editing programs or viewing programs like this one display transparent areas. So this image does not have any white area or any color of area around the branches and leaves. It's just transparent. We'll be adding that into the game engine. We'll actually make a tree in this video. Let's go ahead and jump in. Of course, you can download those two images in the description area below this video on YouTube. Let's go ahead and start off by adding that image of bricks onto this cube. In order to add images onto a mesh, we have to do something called unwrapping to a UV map. So we're creating a UV map by unwrapping or laying out flat all of the faces on the mesh. In order to create a UV map, we have to have another window on the screen. So I'm going to take this large 3D viewport window and divide it into two by grabbing this little triangular crosshatched area, and I'll left click and drag to the left to divide the window into two. I'm going to change this right 3D viewport window into, by clicking down here, I can change its type to a UV image editor window. In the UV image editor window, we can do a few things. We can actually bring images into Blender this way. We can just go down to open. We can also click on new and actually create brand new images inside of Blender itself. We can also create that UV map by unwrapping a mesh that we have selected into this area, which again will just lay out all of the faces. So that's actually what we're going to do first. We're going to create a UV map of this cube. Just to note that if you've scaled your cube at all or you stretched it, so I might press S and then Z on my keyboard. In fact, I'm going to turn on my screencast keys so you can see down here what keys I'm pressing. If I tap S and then Z on my keyboard to stretch out or scale that cube on the Z axis only, I will want to make sure that before I unwrap, I go down to Object with the cube selected, Object, and Apply and Scale or Rotation and Scale. In this case, I'm going to select Scale. Sure, so now to create that UV map, what I can do is I can press Tab to go into that mesh's edit mode. I want to make sure that everything is selected. So everything is orange here. If I select something, only one little part of it is orange. I want to make sure everything is selected. So I can press the A key a few times on my keyboard. A is the keyboard shortcut that toggles selecting all or deselecting all, but I'll just make sure everything is orange. I'm going to press U now with everything selected in edit mode. U brings up the UV mapping menu. And in this case, because I haven't taken the time to mark any seams on the mesh, that would be how I could actually customize the UV map and customize exactly where the mesh will get cut apart, kind of like seams on a piece of clothing for a pattern for a piece of clothing. We're not going to do that though. If you're interested in learning how to do UV mapping with creating seams on a more complicated object, I'll put a link on the screen right now to my tutorial on UV mapping in the Cycles Blender render engine. In that video, again, we do cover how to make seams. We paint different sides of the cube with different letters like a child's toy, but that's a good place to start before you get into more complicated objects. In this case, we're not creating seams though. We're just going to do it the simple way. I'm going to press U again. We're not going to select unwrap because that would require seams. Instead, I'm going to select Smart UV Project, and that will kind of figure out the seams for me automatically based on the angle difference between faces. So Smart UV Project, and I'll click on OK. So now, as you can see, we have two almost squares over here, and we have all 4 faces laid out. If you just have a cube, you'll have basically 6 squares over here representing the faces on the cube. Great, I'm going to press tab to go back into object mode, and now it's time to make the material. So with the cube selected, I'm going to go to the materials tab. This object actually already has material on it, but we'll just start from scratch. So I'll click on this little minus button to get rid of it. Let's create a new material. I'll click on new. I'm going to give it a color. So I'll click under diffuse, and just so we can see what it is, I'm going to make it a bright pink. Sure. Let's go ahead and name this material. It's always a good idea. So I'm going to type in bricks material, and I'll press enter, but obviously right now it does not have bricks on it. So let's go ahead and switch over now to the checkerboard tab, which is called the textures tab. Before we do that though, we want to make sure we have the material selected that we want to add the texture to. So if you have multiple materials on the same object, you want to select the one that has, that you want to have the image texture on. So with that selected, I'm going to go over to the textures tab, and we want to make sure that we're selecting material textures here. It's that one by default, so don't worry, if you have the mesh selected, you're probably pretty good. And I'm going to click on new, and by default, new textures are based on an image or movie that you need to point to on your computer. So in order to do that, I'm going to go down to the image heading, I'll click on open, and then on my desktop, I have 2 files. I'm going to view them as thumbnails so I can see them. Great, I'll bring that brick texture in. I'll click on open image, and now I've got the texture here. And if I go back to the material tab, you'll see that my selected material has that brick texture on it. Right now we can't see anything though, because this viewport is still set to solid viewport shading down here. So I'm going to click here and switch my viewport shading up to material. In fact, I'm going to switch my render engine to the Blender game just so everything will work as expected when we actually play our game. So I'm going to go to material viewport shading, and as you can see now, our brick texture is on the object. That side is black and that side is black, as is that one, because there is no light on that side of the object. So actually I'm going to go over to the world tab, I believe it is, and I'm going to turn on environment lighting, and I will just put light in the scene from all directions, bottom, top, left, right, every side, so we can see it all. In fact, I'm going to turn that down to 0.3, just so we don't have everything too bright. Now, what if you're not happy with the size of the image texture on the object? That comes back to your UV map. If I press tab with my box selected, that will get me back into edit mode, the tab key. I can actually select parts of the UV map faces or vertices or edges or even islands. There's another object called islands, which are attached faces in a group, which we actually don't have any in this mesh because every face, if I go over to face select mode, every face is a separate island, as it were. If you had groups with your own seams, that's the islands option there. If I want to move the bricks on a specific face, what I can do is I can grab or right click to select a face, and what face is that? I'm not really sure, but if I press G with that face selected, of course I right click to select things, and I move it around, you can see that I'm also moving the texture on that face, so I can see right now on the in the 3D viewport over here, so you can kind of see it moving around like crazy. If I select that one and move it around, it's attached, unfortunately. What I might do in this case is I might select all of the faces, so I'll press A a few times with my mouse in this window, and I can tap S to scale up all my selected faces, so I'll tap S. And when I scale that up, you can see that the texture is getting smaller on the mesh, and that's because all of the bricks in the image are now smaller, and they're still on that square. They're smaller as compared to the size of the faces in the UV map. Now, one important thing to know is that the UV map will repeat forever, and that's why I'm able to scale these faces outside of this square and that's because the bricks or the entire brick image will repeat itself in every direction away from this square. So that's how we can get things smaller. Now, in this case, because I scaled my cube and just because of the way that the Smart UV project worked a few moments ago, these faces are attached, or at least some of them are, as you can see, and that's not exactly what I want. So I'm actually going to go back into, actually we are in edit mode here. I'm going to actually select all of my edges. So I'll go into edge select mode. I'll select all the edges with the A key a few times, and I'm going to press Control E. Control E brings up my edges menu, and I'm just going to manually mark all of the edges as seams, and that's okay because this is a very simple object. So I'm going to say mark seam, not to be confused with mark sharp, mark seam. And so now all of these edges, if I deselect them, they're actually red now because they're marked as seams. I'm going to re-unwrap this cube, so I'm going to select everything again. I'll press the A key a few times and I'll press U. This time I'm not going to use Smart UV project, I'm going to use Unwrap. And now, as you can see, all of the faces are separate. If I go into face select mode, I can select each individual one and move it independently. It's not attached to one another. Okay, so now some of these bricks are facing the wrong way. Let's say I select, actually what I'm going to do is over here in the header of the UV image editor window, if I press this button, what that will do is it will, and let's see what it's called. It's called the Keep UV and Edit Mode Mesh Selection in Sync. The selection will stay in sync. That means that I can now only select one face at a time, and it will show me what face corresponds in this window. So if I want to see, I don't have to have everything selected anymore. If I didn't have that button dark and I deselected everything over here, you don't see the mesh. But if I turn this on, you can see the mesh even though nothing is selected over here. And as I select faces, you can see which face it is over here. In fact, it'll select it over here as well. So I don't think that that texture is facing the right way. So I'm going to select that one, and then over here I can rotate it. In fact, if I tap R with that selected, and then I type 90 on my keyboard, and then I press enter, so R90 and then enter, I can rotate it, and then I can put it wherever I want to, and line up nicely. Okay, so I lined up that black bar with that black bar. Great. Is anything else wrong? Yes, that one's wrong. So I'll rotate this one, R90, enter, and then I can move it around. And that one's looking pretty good, but it's a little bit off. So I'm going to move it a little bit down like that. In fact, it's going off the edge, which means that there's a thicker black bar here just because of the black bars in this actual image. So I'm going to move it down, and I'm pretty much happy with that. If I go back into object mode with the tab key, I now have a brick or a block made of bricks. Let's go ahead and switch over talking about transparent materials in the game engine. If I press P right now, the brick texture looks great on that cube. Let's go ahead and add a new object. I'm going to press Shift S though. Shift S will bring up my snap menu. In case my 3D cursor is somewhere else in the scene, I want to make sure I'm adding new objects to the middle of the scene, just so I know where they are. So I'll press Shift S on my keyboard and select cursor to center, and then I'll put the 3D cursor right back down there. So when I add new objects, so I'll press Shift A on my keyboard. When I add new objects, I'm just going to add a plane and move it over. New objects get put where that 3D cursor is. I'm going to add a new material to this brand new square plane. So I'm going to go up to the Materials tab with it selected. I'm going to click on New, and we're going to make a material that has a blue material on it. If I press P to play my game, though, you can see that it is an opaque material. The word opaque means not at all see-through, and we want to change that. So I'm going to press Escape on my keyboard. In order to make materials that have transparency, I have to, under the Materials tab with that object and that material selected, I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom until I find the section called Transparency. I need to check this little checkbox next to the word Transparency, open that section up. I'll continue to scroll down, and it's just as simple as with Z transparency selected as turning down the alpha value. And now, as you can see, as I turn that all the way down to 0, that object becomes totally transparent. And when I press P to play my game, it's totally transparent. If I press escape and I turn that a little bit up, and I press P to play my game, you can see that you can see it, but it is a little bit transparent. And just to make sure, I'm going to press Shift S and bring my 3D cursor to the selected object. Just so when I add a new object, I'm going to press Shift A. I'm going to add a monkey. Sure, why not? And maybe I'll rotate it around so we can see its face. I just double tapped R just then to rotate it kind of freely. When you double tap R, you get a funny green and red cursor, and you can rotate things kind of any which way, which is a little bit difficult, but you can. So I'm going to put the monkey head just below the sheet of glass, essentially, and we'll press P to play the game. And as you can see, I now have a transparent blue glass-like material on that plane. So that's how easy adding transparent materials are to objects in Blender for the game engine. Let's go ahead now and create an almost identical plane. So I'm going to press Shift S on my keyboard and just bring my cursor back to the center of my scene back there. I'm going to press Shift A. I'm going to add a plane again. In this case, we'll move it over there. Now I want to add that texture or image texture of leaves on a branch onto this plane. So let's go ahead and add a new material. So new, and I'm going to make it a wacky color. Let's make it an aqua kind of a color, just so we can see where it is. Now I'm going to name this material, so I'll click in there, and I'm going to call it leaves. Sure. Now with that material selected, it's blue, I'm going to hop over to the Textures tab, and in the first texture slot, I'm going to click on New to create a new texture, and I have to point it to an image or movie. I'm going to click on Open, go to my desktop, View as Thumbnails, and I'll click and select that image and Open Image. So now what's going on? I can't see the leaves on the mesh. If I go back to my Materials tab, you can see that it's there, but I'm not seeing it on the flat plane. And that's because I have not unwrapped this plane. Yes, you need to unwrap anything that you're adding images to. You could select, if I go back to the Texture tab with that texture selected, and I go down to the Mapping section, you'll see that by default, Blender maps to UV coordinates. That's the coordinates you would create by unwrapping your mesh in edit mode. But in this case, we haven't done that yet, so there is no UV map to use. So you could technically use generated coordinates. And as you can see, because this is just a square, a flat plane that's 2 by 2 Blender units, it works. And if it's not the right scale, you could scale it in different ways. Depending on what you needed, you could offset it. So if I turn this back to 1 and 1, you could offset it to the amount that you wanted. But in this case, it's a better idea. In fact, in all cases, it's a better idea to create a UV map quite quickly, especially in this case where it's just a flat plane. So let's go ahead, and with that mesh selected, I'll press Tab on my keyboard to go into edit mode with all of the faces, or all the vertices, or all the edges selected. I'll press U, and I'm going to select unwrap in this case because it's just a flat square. And so now the flat square gets laid out in the square UV map. So now we do have a UV map. So now I'm going to go back into object mode with the tab key, of course. I'll change the mapping back to UV. And you might want to select, we didn't do it in the last case because we only had one UV map on that object, but you might want to actually select the UV map that you created, which is actually listed under the Object Data tab down there. So I could call this Leafs UV map. Sure. And now I would want to actually select that Leafs UV map over here, again, under that same mapping section. Great. If I press P to play my game, though, we still have that aqua color under the leaves, and that's not what I want. I'm going to go ahead and press Escape because we want to bring in the alpha value of this PNG image from the image texture with the leaves and the branch. In order to do that, I have to do a few things. I'm going to go back to my Material tab here, with that leaves material selected. I'm going to go down to the section called Transparency again, and I'm going to enable transparency, and I believe I have to turn that all the way down to 0 to make my image totally transparent. In fact, this image has some, or this material has some specular, some glossiness, and that's why we're still seeing it a little bit in there. So if I turn down the specular intensity, it'll go totally transparent. And if you deselect it, there will still be a little orange dot that you can select, or you can select it in your outliner here. It's called plane.001 in my case. So let's go ahead and make it so we can still see the image. That's very, very easy to do. Under the texture tab with this leaves material selected, all I have to do is go down to the section called influence and check the checkbox next to the word alpha. Again, PNG images have not only a red and a green and a blue channel in their image format, but they also have an alpha channel, which is what we're accessing here. So I'll check that, and now as you can see, it's actually taking into consideration the alpha channel of the image. And then again, that will only work by selecting that, and you have to have, under the material tab, you have to have your transparency, your Z transparency turned down to 0 there. Now, if you're worried about how it's actually calculating the edge or kind of interpolating the edge of the image where the transparent part meets the opaque part, you can actually adjust that with this value here under game settings under the material tab. If I select alpha clip, what it'll do is it'll actually take all the semi-transparent areas of the image and make them totally transparent and only leave the totally opaque part of the image there. And that will kind of not look good, or maybe that's what you want if you have like some smoke or some shadows that are partly transparent in the image that you want to get rid of and clip off. Otherwise, I would just leave it at opaque, which will leave it kind of more blurred or blended, or alpha sort or alpha blend. They all pretty much do the same thing, at least opaque, alpha sort, and alpha blend. Alpha anti-aliasing does the exact opposite of what you might think it would do. It turns off the anti-aliasing, which means that there are no more interpolated or blurriness along the edges of where the transparent meets the opaque areas of the image. So I generally don't use that. I just leave it on opaque. Now that I have this transparent material, I want to make sure that I can see both sides of the leaves in case my character or my camera goes around to the other side. If I press P to play my game, we can see it great from one side, but if I press escape and I orbit around to the other side and I press P, it's totally transparent. That's a really easy fix though. If I press escape, I want to make sure that under that same game settings section, I uncheck backface culling. Backface culling gets rid of all the back faces, or will not show up in your game, and it will not render in your game if you have that object selected. So now if I uncheck that and I press P, you can see both sides of the leaves very, very easily. With that single branch, I can make a tree really, really easily, and that's what I'll do in the last part of this video. I'm going to press Shift S and put my cursor back to the center of my scene. I'm going to add, with Shift A, default cube. I'll move it over, and maybe I'll go to my front orthographic view, and I'll move that up. And what I'm going to do here is make a small cube, and I'll move it down, actually a bit bigger than that, and I'll move it down to the ground. I'm going to go into edit mode with the tab key, of course. I'm going to select this top face. We're going to make a very, very simple tree, a spindly tree, and we'll copy all of the leaves onto it. We're actually going to make the branch and the leaves bend a little bit to make it more realistic. So I'm going to grab this top face, and I'm going to press E to extrude that up. I'll tap S, and maybe I'll move that back down and make another extrusion there. Maybe I'll move that a little bit so we have a bent tree, and I'll rotate with the R key, and maybe I'll extrude again, and I'll rotate that, and let's go ahead and do a little extrusion, because from there I want to extrude out 2 more little branches, and we will make this look good. We will add the subdivision surface modifier to this to make it look rounded. Let's go ahead, and I'm going to make a loop cut. So I'll press Control R on my keyboard. I'll put my mouse around one of these edges to make that little pink loop right there. Hopefully you can see that. I'll click and then move my mouse up and click. I'm going to grab this face, and maybe I'll rotate it from the side so it points up a little bit. I'll tap E. I'll tap S to scale. So basically I'm just extruding and scaling and then rotating to make it look a little bit more random. I'm going to tap E again to extrude just a little bit out, and maybe I will go to my top view roughly and rotate that a little bit. And so now I can extrude from that face. And this is just very, very random. Off the cuff, we're making a really simple tree here. And E. And I'm going to make one more little side branch. So I'm going to extrude a few more times. And I'll extrude that little face out. We have a little mini cube section there. I'll extrude that out and tap S to scale it and bring it up like that. Maybe that one will go up or maybe down. Sure. We have a very, very simple tree here. In fact, I might do one more little branch. I'm going to press Control R to make a loop cut right about there. I'll press Control B to bevel that out. And actually I didn't bevel that enough, so I'll undo that. Control Z, Control B to bevel that out. And now I'll make a branch coming out of, let's say, that face. So E, and then S, and then E, and then I'll move that one up. And then I'll extrude that one. And I'll extrude out that. So now I have a very simple tree. Maybe I'll take some of these faces and just sort of move them down a little bit so it's not a straight branch. Same thing over here. I'll make a loop cut and then put it right there and then move that down just so it's not quite so straight. It's a little bit more crooked. And maybe I'll select that and move it over. Great. Okay, so there's my very spindly looking little tree. We'll add branches onto it in just a moment. First thing though, I'm going to add a subdivision surface modifier to the tree to smooth it out. So I'm going to, under the wrench tab with the tree selected, I'm going to add the subdivision surface modifier that will smooth out the tree. I'll turn both subdivisions down to 1, and because the subsurf modifier, or the way it works, is it smooths out sections, especially when you have very few edges, you're going to get a little bit of this over smoothing. And so I'll press tab to go into edit mode. The way you can solve this is just by adding a few more loop cuts. So I'm going to press Control R again to loop cut. I'll put one right there, and if I click and then slide that down to where it almost meets its base, so if I put it right about there, it'll stop it from smoothing so much. So Control R, and I'll put it right there and click and slide it up. And that happens because the subsurf modifier or subdivision surface modifier will take the middle of the faces that are next to each other and blend them from one middle to the other middle. That's why we're getting the blending from there down to there. Those faces are blending. So Control R, click, and then Control R, click and click, Control R, click, Control R. I'm going to put one near the end just so it goes out to not quite so sharp of a point. Control R, click, Control R, click, Control R, click, Control R. There we go. And we have two that are right near each other, two edge loops, one there and one at the bottom, of course. That's why it's not so bad down there. Maybe I'll hold Alt and right click to select all of those edges and just move that down a little bit so we get a sharper edge at the bottom. And that looks pretty good to me. Are there any more that I need to fix? Yeah, one right there. So Control R, click, and right there. Maybe I'll put one right in the middle just to scale that down a little bit. Sure. Okay. We have a tree. Let's go ahead and add branches to it. As I said, we want to make these leaves and this branch bent a little bit. So that's as easy as pressing tab to go into its edit mode. And then I'll use the subdivide tool. I'm going to subdivide up this mesh. And because we're not changing its general shape, it won't distort the image on the face very much. So I'll press, with everything selected in edit mode, I'll press W and subdivide. And I'm going to subdivide this up with the number of cuts down here. If you can't see that section, you might want to press T on your keyboard to bring up the tool shelf, and then this little plus down here will expand the new tool selection option. So I'm just going to create maybe that many, maybe 5 by 5. Sure, I'll press tab to go back into object mode. I'm actually going to make the origin where this face actually rotates. I'm going to put that right at the base of the image of the branch. So I'm going to go to my top view, and I'm going to put my 3D cursor exactly where the image is, just to make sure it's not too high up or too low down. So from the top view, I'll press Shift S, and I'm going to say cursor to selected. That'll put the 3D cursor right where that orange dot is, the origin. I'm going to left click to put it right about there at the base of that branch. And now I'm going to set the origin of this selected object to the 3D cursor. And because I have this mesh selected, I can do this, origin to 3D cursor, and now if I rotate the branch, it'll rotate exactly at the base of the branch. So let's go ahead and make the tree actually a brown color. So I'll go to materials, and I'll add a new material. We'll call this wood, and I'm just going to make this a brown material, which is basically just dark orange. And we can make it more saturated or less saturated. I'm going to make it not at all glossy, so I'll turn specular down. And let's go ahead and select that mesh of leaves. And in order to make it bent, I'm going to go into edit mode with the tab key, of course. And I could just go into vertices select mode down here, and I could just start moving vertices down. So I could select maybe those 3 and move them down, and maybe that one and move it down to make it bent. But there's an easier way. If I select maybe that vertice there, and I turn on proportional editing, and I'll put a link on the screen right now to my video in proportional editing. It's a way you can actually select one part of your mesh, and it'll move more of your mesh in a nice kind of smooth fall off. So to demonstrate what that looks like, if I select that one vertice, and then down here, that's what this little circle is, I turn on proportional editing, I enable it, and if I now press G, you can see a circle around my mouse, which determines the fall off of the proportional editing. So now if I move, because I just pressed G to grab, if I move that vertice, it's moving nearby vertices. You can see it was moving that vertice and that one and that one. So if I press G again and I scroll, I can make the influence circle smaller or bigger. So now if I pull that down, you can see that it's pulling and pushing more of the mesh. So what I can do here is I can press R and I can rotate, and then I can move that down, and now I have a nice draping leaf. I can go over here and I can select these 2 vertices maybe, and I can tap, or I can drag that down, and I can tap R. Maybe I make this smaller. Maybe I'll put those down there. Maybe I'll rotate that and put it down there. So now I have a nice draping set of leaves. I can move maybe these vertices up a little bit, but I'll press G and then Z, and I can make that look a bit higher up, and maybe I'll move these 2 up. Again, we don't have vertices exactly where the branch is, so that makes it a little bit more tricky, but it's not too difficult. So I'll tap R in this case. Actually, I'll move those down first, then I'll tap R. Maybe I'll make that a bit bigger, and maybe a bit smaller than that actually, and I'll move that down, and I might move some of these other ones down too, like that one and that one and that one. Okay, I might move a few of these branches up, or a few of these vertices with the branch up, G and then Z. I'll scroll up to make that smaller, and I'll move that one up a little bit too. Great, I have a nice draping branch. It doesn't look too fake now because it's draped. I'm going to set the shading of this as smooth, because now you can see the polygons of the face, so I'll check shading smooth. And so now what I can do is I can move the branch to where it should go. I'll move it over to that tip of that branch from the top view, and then if I orbit around, you can see it's way too low, so I'll move it straight up to there. And I'm going to make sure from the top view it's all aligned. If I orbit around, it's all aligned. But now, because the origin is right there, right in the right spot, if I tap R and then Z, I can rotate it to any way I want. In fact, I can rotate it from any view. I can go to any random view and tap R, and I can make it much more random. I can duplicate this now. I can press Shift D and then right click to put it back in the same spot. And if I tap R and then Z, I can make a copy, rotate it from the exact same spot. Because I tapped R and then Z, it's rotating on that Z axis just around like that. And now I can tap R or R twice to rotate it very randomly. I'll select those 2 now and duplicate them from the top view, Shift D. I'm going to put their origin, which should be the same for both, right about to there. I have to make sure that it's up and down to the right level, to right about there. I'll tap R and then Z. Maybe I'll tap R and rotate those down. Maybe I'll take those same two and duplicate them over here, Shift D. I'll put those two right about there. I have to make sure they're right up and down. They're not, definitely. So I'll move it over just a little bit. And I'll zoom in and put it right about there. And now R. And I'll duplicate them again, Shift D. I'll put them right at the base or tip of that branch there. That is at a different level, it's higher up. And I'll go to my top view again, rotate. So that's on the Z axis when you're rotating from the top. And it's looking pretty good. It's looking like a little tree, hey? Let's go ahead and finish this off. I'll duplicate these a few more times, Shift D, or from my top view, is it in the right spot? Roughly, I'll go to my front view or some other view just to make sure it's at the right height. And how is that looking? Maybe I want to rotate those ones up a little bit, so I'll tap R, and maybe I'll duplicate those now, Shift D. I'll put that right about there. I'll rotate them. I have to make sure that they're at the right level. They're definitely not, so they'll go right about there. And let's go ahead, maybe I'm going to rotate that one just so that they're all a little bit different, and that one, and now RZ. Let's go ahead and add a few more just because it would not look good if all the branches just had two smaller branches with leaves on them, and we can also add some more branches kind of randomly around. So I'm going to take one of the branches and I'll duplicate it, so I'll press Shift D, and I'm going to put it right coming out of where the Y in the tree is. So I'll move it down to right about there. Is it at the right spot? Close enough almost. So right about there. And then maybe I'll rotate it R and then Z on the Z axis, and maybe I'll rotate it a little bit like that. It's looking pretty good to me. Let's add one or two more. I'll go to my top view again, Shift D. I might make a smaller leaf with smaller branches. Be careful though, because it'll stand out if the leaves on this branch are too much smaller. So I'll make it just a little bit smaller, and then I'll rotate that. I'll orbit around just to make sure it's at the right height. It wasn't. And now I'll rotate it on the Z axis. Maybe I'll rotate that one so it's kind of hanging down a little bit. That branch does not over there have any leaves off of it, so I'll duplicate this one. It's smaller, but that's okay. And I'm going to make sure it's the right height or right position on the Z axis. And I will rotate that one around like that. So now we have a little tree, and it looks pretty good. If I press P to play my game, it works, it looks good. To make shadows happen properly, if I press Escape and I select my lamp is actually under the tree in this case. There it is. If I move it above the tree, you'll notice that the lighting changes on the individual leaves. That's great. But if I press P to play my game, I want there to be nice shadows on the ground. I actually don't even have a ground yet, so I will press Shift S to put my 3D cursor back in the center of my scene. I'm going to press Shift A. I'm going to add a circle. Actually, a circle will look good because if I scale the circle up and then I press Tab to go into edit mode, and then I press F to fill in the ground is just the circle rather was just a circle of connected edges, but they didn't have a face in the middle of them. So I tapped F to fill in the selected edges that were in a loop. So now I press Tab to go back into object mode, and I press P to play my game. You can see the ground and you can see the leaves on the tree, but there are no shadows, and that's for a few reasons. Mostly because this lamp is a point lamp. And in the game engine, you're limited to what kind of lamps you can use that will actually cast shadows. This piece of glass and that monkey head are in the ground, so they were looking kind of funny there, so I'll move them up. If I select my lamp, the best kind of lamp type for the game engine is, in my opinion, the sun lamp. The sun lamp generates light everywhere, and it casts shadows quite nicely. You can see where the shadows are limited to if you check this little Show Shadow Box section. The shadow box will be where shadows can possibly be and where the light is, I believe. Actually, the light would be anywhere with the sun, but if I go and move that elsewhere, you can see there are no more shadows on the tree. So I'll move it back, and you can change the frustum size. That means the size of the square that shadows will be in for the sun. So frustum size, I'll make that quite a bit bigger to encapsulate the entire circle ground. And you might be worried that these squares are here. The shadows of the planes that the leaves are on are casting shadows and not the individual leaves. But luckily, if I press P to play my game, there is no light. And that's because under the camera tab, the better lighting system, the better viewport shading lighting system for games is not multi-texture. That's under the camera tab. It is GLSL. That provides much better lighting and shading and shadows. And the sun lamp does not support casting shadows under the multi-texture setting for shading. So you want to make sure it's set to GLSL. And then if you press play or P, there we go, you should get shadows in your game of the actual leaves, as you can see right there. Actually, just one more thing here. I'm interrupting my video because I realized after I finished recording it that I didn't talk to you about packing in your images. Right now I have a Blender file, and separately from that Blender file, I have my image textures. My original image textures are on my desktop. My Blender file is saved somewhere else. In order to make sure that my game exports or is playable with these image textures in the game, I have to make sure that I pack the images into the Blender file. And that means that the images themselves will actually become a part of the Blender file, or a copy of them will be included always with the Blender file. In order to do that, I have to go up to the File menu and go to External Data and select Pack All into Blend. Once I do that, the size of those PNG images, however many kilobytes or megabytes those images take up, will be included in the Blender file. So your Blender file will become bigger as a result, but that's worth it because once I pack all into Blend, as you can see up here now, it says packed 2 files, the 2 image textures, the bricks and the leaves. It will never get separated from the game. In fact, you need to do that if you want to export your game when you're finished it. If I now go up to File and Save, the images are in the Blender file. But that will be it for this video. If you like this video or if you learned something, please go ahead and click on that like button below. And if you want to see more videos just like this one in Blender and in tech, please click on that subscribe button to see more videos from my channel. Thanks a lot. See you in the next one. Thanks. Bye-bye.